Morticians, what is the most bizarre, uncomfortable, creepy, etc. case or situation you've had to deal with? Content warning. Discussion of self-termination, death, gore, and the loss of children. Doc was a coroner, if I recall correctly, before switching to doctor. I can never remember the details correctly for the medical stuff, but pretty much the body getting examined with a former birthday clown. There weren't any external wounds, so he figured the cause of death was internal. The guy had gastroparesis, which, to my dad, meant, cool, stomach contents should be in good shape. His team opens the dude up and sees this flurry of F. There's partially digested birthday cake, that edible confetti stuff, effing streamers, and about a dozen pills of Xanax next to all of it. Dad sifts through the stomach some more and sees what looks like a sponge of some kind. He pulls one out and it's an effing sponge dino that comes in those capsules you drop in water. He finds more, about a small biome's worth. He thought he was getting effing pranked. The story pieces together as the clown decided to end it with the Xanax and booze. He gets a store-bought cake and eats it with everything on it, then chases down some dino sponges just for the hell of it. Heard on the news a friend from my youth had been killed. I was terribly sad for him. He never could escape his demons, and it led him down some terrible paths. Came into work a few nights later, and there he was, face completely bashed in by a rock. This wasn't the first time someone I knew ended up in our morgue, but certainly the saddest. I worked my cousin's fatality wreck. I was first on scene and didn't even recognize him. It took all I had to make the knock and tell my aunt and uncle, but I felt like I was the one that had to do it. My ex-in-laws were in the death business. They told me a story once about the county attorney whose wife passed away. The family was very wealthy and she had a mouthful of gold fillings. The attorney demanded that my in-laws retrieve the gold from her mouth. This required using a dental drill to drill down her teeth and dig out the gold. My ex-father-in-law complied with the attorney's wishes but was physically ill about having to do such a needless step to this lady. Yikes! I mean, I know sometimes money can be tight and folks have to do what they have to do, but defiling a dead relative to get some of their gold fillings just feels a little wrong. I don't even personally care much about preserving or taking care of corpses. Use mine as a piñata when I'm gone for all I care, but this just feels icky. I was a student at the time, but my first ever bloater was brought in, and once we popped him, insides were outsides and everywhere. Would not recommend. On my first night shift, I thought staff were effing with me because I kept hearing what sounded like breathing. Fresh body brought in and was releasing gas. I had never dealt with anyone dying in the hour being brought in, so it was scary hearing this body breathing. I've been there when family members have passed and witnessed breathing and limbs moving, so I know it's normal, but as a student, the staff like to F with you. Bizarre one was piecing a guy back together after he committed self-termination by gunshot to the face. Family wanted an open casket. Had to try our best, then ask one family member in to see if they still wanted open casket because we just didn't feel like it was right. Dad come in, sees that no matter how we tried, we couldn't make him look the same as before, and agrees that family shouldn't see him this way. The day we delivered him to the funeral parlor, family changes their mind and has open casket anyway. Found out rest of family didn't know he shot himself in the face. We ended up getting a letter of complaint from other members of the family for the open casket. I finished as a student a few days after, but would still love to be in that career though. I'd never been in the room with death until my infant daughter passed away last weekend. Congenital brain issue, expected death at home. She died quite suddenly, and I'd always heard that bodies can move and breathe after death. I was holding her, she had stopped breathing, and she had no heartbeat. We had a stethoscope handy because she was on a feeding tube and we had to check placement. Suddenly, she started gasping. She started doing agonal breathing, a completely last-ditch brainstem reflex to revive herself. I thought it was just gas at first, then she kept doing it. After about 5 minutes of being dead and blue without breathing or heartbeat, she brought herself back completely, pinked right up, normal heart rate. It was the most incredible and shocking and awful thing I've ever seen in my life. I wish someone had warned me this was possible. When the hospice nurse got there, she said that dying infants often practice death and die several times. Our daughter incurred some brain damage from this, not that it was an issue in our case. She ended up dying and reviving herself with agonal breathing one more time before she finally passed. The process took 8 hours. Now that I've seen someone die and come back, I fully understand why people created zombie mythology and otherwise invented paranormal explanations for these things. I saw it with my own eyes and still don't believe it. Well, that might be one of the most heartbreaking things I've heard. No one should have to go through that, and I'm sorry. As for the open casket family, I think you all did what you could, but when it comes to dealing with death, folks are just going to have a hard time no matter which way you do things, I think. I work with the dead, procure eyes and corneas for transplant. While I was working on one guy at the medical examiner's office, they brought in another guy whose cat had eaten his face clean. Just his face, nothing else. It was a sort of decaying but still somewhat normal-looking dude with a bright Halloween-looking skull picked clean. Lots of murder victims, gunshots, car accidents, even one train accident. A guy who hanged himself in front of his kids with a dog leash, which was still in the bag with his body. High-caliber self-inflicted gunshot wound to the face with teeth and jaw and bits everywhere and a bunch of gauze stuffed into the remaining hole. Let's not forget the guy in the decomp room who was just a pile of bones, hair, and leathery tissue paired with a bucket of goo. Crazy stuff, but never a dull day. Not a mortician, this comes from my mother back when she was a teenager. Guy she knows takes a job with a local funeral home. He works the graveyard shift, all was well for the first few months. Dude is often weirded out at work, claims that the building is haunted. Earlier in the evening, they get a call from the hospital saying that they have a lady there ready for pickup. They pick her up, guy is freaking out, says he has a bad feeling. Later in the evening, a mortician has to step out for a bit, leaving the guy there alone with the dead lady. He goes about his work, still a little freaked out. Suddenly, he hears this low, soft moan. He swears it is just his mind playing tricks on him, goes about his business. He hears it again, little louder than last time. It is late. He is alone. He is just hearing things. Probably just the pipes settling. The plumbing is old after all. Short time passes, and it is louder. At this point, he is sure he isn't just imagining things. He knows he heard the dead lady moan. His first thought was the mortician was effing with him. He has been shaken all evening, and this a-hole is pranking him. He marches over, very funny UD, yanks back the sheet covering the dead lady, expecting to find the mortician somewhere around her. Dead lady grabs the guy's wrist. He lets out this scream and bolts for the door, forgets his car, runs all the way home. Turns out, old lady wasn't dead. Hospital got it wrong. Hooray 1950s medicine. She'd been in a coma or something, and they had been sure she had passed on earlier that morning. She woke up at the funeral home and scared the ever-loving hell out of the assistant. He quit the next day, said he would never set foot there ever again. You gotta feel bad for the old lady in that story. She must have been so scared and confused as she was waking up. And I'm sure that guy screaming and running away didn't help things. Or maybe she enjoyed scaring him. I know I would. A writing professor of mine used to work in small-town journalism and decided to interview some folks from the local retirement home to get a close-up view of his town's history. One of his interviews was an ancient retired mortician who told him a rather interesting story. Shortly before 1920, two teens were going to a school dance in a blizzard. The carriage they had taken got stranded and the boy went for help. The girl unfortunately froze to death in the carriage in an upright seated position. Apparently, the mortician had to seat her in a rocking chair in front of the fire to thaw her out before he could go about his usual business. Mom was a mortician. Of the stories she's told me, creepiest would either be the guy that had his face eaten off by wild boars while hunting, guess he wasn't that good at it, or the guy that fell into a wood chipper. Funny, poor word choice, thing was, I was at a breakfast a few days later where fellow high schoolers were trying to gross out the girls at the table. And when they pointed out that I wasn't really bothered by it, I kept chewing and saying, yeah, my mom got that guy. Said it was effing gross. Everyone goes silent. I stopped chewing and looked up to everyone looking pale. Shrugged. Oh, you all forgot she's a mortician, didn't you? And kept eating. Uncomfortable for her was one that was also kind of sad. This woman was morbidly obese, like when they somehow all got her on the gurney at her home, when they were pushing it out, the wheels were pushing indentations down into the wood floors. Now this woman is what some bullies would call a whale. I wouldn't, but we all know a-holes. Well, apparently this woman loved the crap out of some blue whales. Family kept going on and on about it. So the time comes for them to bring the clothes for her wake. They bring a big blue moo-moo and a gaudy blue whale brooch. Then they hand her the CD to play. Usually it's church hymns or sad country songs, etc. No one listens to it before because why would you? So the service starts, Mom pops the CD in, boop, goddamn blue whale calls, fills the funeral home. My mom was very professional with her job, but every funeral director had to excuse themselves to compose themselves. Laugh my butt off, please tell me this isn't true. It was a respectful thing, according to my mom. This woman really loved whales, and her family definitely paid tribute to it however they could. Sorry for the crap formatting on phone. Not me, but my best friend works in the death business. So since she doesn't have an account, I'm going to steal her karma because this is my favorite story. She tells me all sorts of lovely things about her job and the recoveries she has done, but my favorite involves a gurney and some stairs. To set the scene, a family called in that their mother had passed in her apartment. 3rd story, narrow halls, and no elevators. Anyways, she goes to pick up the body to take back to the funeral home with an assistant. So they get up there and lift this woman who's close to 300 pounds onto the gurney and begin their journey down to the van. Mind you, the whole family was there and pretty much in hysterics and crowd around as they make their way to the stairs. With family watching, they make it about halfway down the first flight of stairs when the body starts to slide. There's no way to reposition, so my friend who is at the foot of the gurney is now about butt level to the freshly deceased. So trying to make the best of the situation, they continue their way down and try not to shift the body anymore. The thing about dead bodies is that gas starts to exit pretty quickly, and I'm sure you know where my story is going. The body started letting out farts straight into my friend's face. With every step down they take, and this poor girl has to keep a straight face while getting crop dusted by a dead lady with her whole family watching. Well, it's morbid and a little sad, but damned if we didn't finally get a little levity in this thread. It's nice to have a break from the depressing so that we can just enjoy a funny story about farts. Good times. Story from a friend of mine. She's the mortician, met some guy at the bar. They hit it off and she gave him her number. Within a couple of days, she finds out that the guy died in a car accident because his body ended up at her place of work. Before the funeral service, she received several calls from an unknown number, and whenever she picks up, there was no response. Eventually, she got the eerie hunch that it may be him and proceeded to address him by name. Tells him to pass in peace and stop calling. It worked. Uncomfortable? Being trapped in the morgue alone during a hurricane. Our morgue was basically in a basement-type situation, and the hospital was near a main waterway that flooded. I had to move all the bodies to the highest cabinets, pray the generators would keep everyone cold, and was standing on my desk for about 2 hours when someone finally came for me. Bizarre would-be drowned guy who was dead on arrival, and once locked up in the cabinet, a tapping noise started coming from him. It was a crab that had made itself at home inside him, and when it got cold, he wanted out. Creepy was when we got some people who were doing bath salts and had eaten other people. They looked crazy even in death. A friend of mine's husband does organ recovery and has told us many stories about the weird crap that happens to dead bodies. He was working with a new guy on his first night on the job, and the body they were working on moaned and sat up. The new guy passed out, so my friend just propped him up in a corner and went back to harvesting corneas. I don't want to know what it takes to get used to that kind of thing. Most bizarre, particularly difficult family. None of them could agree at all on what to do with their dad. One faction wanted burial, the other was demanding cremation. After much shouting, they finally agreed on a compromise. They wanted us to cut their father's body in half. That way, one half could be cremated and the other half buried. I had to explain to the unfortunate arranger, who at this point looked beyond exhausted, that no, we could not saw a human body in half because that would be very illegal and very messy. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.